And we're live. Godfrey, thanks for coming on. I'm looking forward to this.
Pleasure.
So I think I know you've done some podcasts in the Bitcoin space already, but for those people that may not have listened to those podcasts or are very familiar with you, how about we get the brief rundown of your storied life up till now?
Right. Well, I was a city fund manager for over 30 years, managing fixed interest, which is terribly unfashionable and boring. It certainly was in the 80s and 90s. Although I was reasonably good at it and won a few prizes for it, as I say, it wasn't frightfully fashionable. And there we are. So my history, as it were, is been in fund management. I'm an Austrian school economist. I was in politics for a little while, and I did sit on the Monetary and Economic Affairs Committee in the European Parliament. So, if you will, I've seen this situation from both sides. You know, I've been on the regulatory side, as it were, and I've also been on the investment side. So I have experience of both. And of course, I'm a very well-known and published gold bug, Austrian school gold bug. And I am still a gold bug, and I've been following Bitcoin and watching Bitcoin for some time because I'm a big believer in cryptocurrency, and that can't be faked by central banks. So I'm a big supporter of Bitcoin. I'm an investor now in Bitcoin because I felt I had to. There's only so much gold that you have to diversify. I couldn't have just galvanized buckets of gold sovereigns all over the place. What I had to do was diversify. And as I don't believe in fiat currency, paper currency, and central banks, Bitcoin was the next obvious port of call. And it's been very enjoyable, and I'm still adding to my Bitcoin portfolio. And so it's been rather fun. But just finishing off on that, I do not see some Bitcoiners see Bitcoin and gold somehow in some form of competition. And I don't see that. I just see it's a way of getting out of the clutches of central banks and diversifying your portfolio. It isn't one thing or the other. It's both. They can run in tandem. They have very similar attributes, and some of the drawbacks that we see on both sides. So, which I don't think, my experience so far, haven't been fully debated. There's an evangelism in Bitcoin which tends to cut people's thinking off from what might be coming further down the road. Oh, I've bought Bitcoin, I'm safe as houses, I can't go wrong. And I don't think it's quite as simple as that. And I'm speaking to you under house arrest in England, and my family can't visit me here because the police will stop them. And I think we need to just contemplate the situation at the moment, the world we are now living in, all right? And that's what I don't think a lot of people are doing.
Yes, and I think, you know, that's a big topic, and I do want to break into that because it's perhaps one of the most important questions to answer. But just before we do, you mentioned you're under house arrest. Most people in the world have experienced some variation thereof over the past 12 months. You know, you had a career in politics. You worked in the City of London in finance. What do you make of what led us to where we are right now and why we are here? How have you come to be locked down in your house? What's gone wrong?
Well, it's an interesting question because I did actually finish my career as the chief executive of a life insurance company in London. So I'm very familiar with mortality statistics and actuarial practices when it comes to life assurance and implications of health. So I'm not a layman in these terms. Now, what do we know? Let's line up what we know. We know that the virus epidemic in the United Kingdom in 1957, 1958, 1968 were all worse than this. We also know that the mortality statistics in 2010. We also know that over the last 20 years, the death variations over the last 20 years, 2020 is only 5% up on the average. So what do we know? What do we draw from that? We know, don't we, that this is not about health. This is not about a public health issue. This is, if you will, the coronavirus thing. This is about a platform for Build Back Better, reset, the new normal, call it what you will. And it's my hypothesis that the complete collapse of the central banking and fiat currency system is going to be on us sooner rather than later. It is my also belief that they know that. Not all politicians know that, because, as you know, most politicians are incredibly stupid. But I would argue that the power, whoever is pulling the strings, and none of us really quite know that, the people pulling the strings know that is happening. And so they want the levers of power. They want the levers of power. And they know now that certainly in the United Kingdom, they know that we will comply with whatever they say. People are walking around with muzzles on their faces, when every single health professional will tell you, if only privately, but it is a mark of subservience to the state. And we're seeing that, and we're being closed down. The country's being closed, but it isn't for public health reasons. It's for something else. And I suspect it's because of the coming collapse of currencies.
Yeah, that's actually one of the specific things I wanted to ask you about. And I think I speak for a lot of people in the Bitcoin space when I say, what's been one of the more terrifying aspects of the past year? And look, we were under no assumptions, or I'll speak for myself, I was under no assumptions about how complacent and how uninformed and how easy to manipulate, the broader population of the world has been for a long time. It's just broken. It's entered into new territory over the past 12 months. And what I find extremely concerning, as you said, if you look at the data around this virus, around mortality, around, the actual data around what this really is, the response that it's elicited is completely irrational. But the problem is that nobody sees fit to do that research for themselves. I'm speaking in terms of, regular citizens. They just acquiesce to anything that comes out of that, electronic box in their living room or the mouths of the people that presumably govern them. And the reason why that's so concerning is because if we're not basing our decisions on rational, logical assessment of the best available data, then what we're basing our behavior and decisions on is pure emotion. And in this case, it might be fear, especially on the hand of the population. So, but when I confront these situations, typically, you can either say this is due to malice or this is due to incompetence. And when I was younger, everything was a conspiracy, right? And so I, saw conspiracy everywhere. As I grew up, as I learned more, as I became more acquainted with the incompetence of a lot of people, I thought, you know what? I see the reactions. I see how easy it is for people to acquiesce, and so I can see how that feeds into incompetence and how incompetence feeds in on itself. And so what I might have thought could only be explained by malevolence, because how else could it be the case that rational human beings would act this way? I think a lot of times now I'm more convinced that it's actually incompetence is the root of this. But you make an interesting point, and this is not something that's quote unquote allowed to be discussed in polite company. But as you and I both know, the financial system, global currency markets, the way in which the global financial system is structured has been fracturing for quite a long time. And in the fall of last year, in September, October, you could look at the repo market and say there's a lot of really strange things going on here that seem to indicate that, the topsy-turvy nature of the financial system is starting to really become unwound. And then lo and behold, a few months later, we have this virus. The reason why I say it's not able to be discussed is because you can't you can't even postulate or have a discussion about could this thing have emerged for malevolent reasons? So was it a matter of this being leveraged, as you say, this crisis being leveraged so that the people in power could exact more control over people? Or is it possible that it was even, it was developed for that reason? And I'm not saying that that's my opinion, but if we can't have a discussion about all the potential possibilities, then surely we're not going to come to any approximation of the truth. What do you think? First of all, what is your take on where we are in the degradation of the existing financial system? And what is your take on how this crisis has been leveraged potentially to cover up and institute a new solution with a scapegoat that is not the people truly responsible for the degradation of this financial system. What's your take on that sort of theory?
Well, as soon as you came off, or the world, or the leaders of the world, the leading economies of the world came off asset-backed currency, it was going to lead to its degradation because there was no other way it could go. Basically, what governments have since the introduction of central banks, and in America, of course, that was 1913, that was quite a long time ago. If you have a machine that will print money, you will print money. It doesn't matter whether you're a politician or a banker or an individual. You will print it because that is what the temptation to do that, especially in a democracy with politicians who want to get the next election won in 4 or 5 years' time. So it's the old Roman thing of bread and circuses. You print money. And now, if they really believed in this new monetary theory, modern monetary theory, which they talk about, the Krugmans of this world, so on and so forth, they're talking about modern, which of course isn't modern at all. It's Keynesianism. We've seen all this before, printing money. But his idea was you just printed money when you needed to print money, really needed to print money, not all the time. Now it's all the time. And so we know that that's degraded the currency. We know that the 1971 dollar, when Nixon closed the gold window, we know that now that dollar is now worth only 8 cents. And all other currencies have gone the same way. We know in this century alone that against gold, we've seen fiat currencies degrade by 80%. And that's just in this century alone. That's only 20 years. So we know this to be the case because you need to print money for two things, basically, politicians. They need to print money for warfare or for welfare. Now, in America, it tends to be warfare. They have $1 trillion budget, wars all over the place, they're permanent state of war. That's the Pentagon, that's the CIA, that's Washington, D.C., that's the neocons who've run the ship for years and years and decades, since Eisenhower, who wasn't a great one for overseas wars because he was a real soldier. Eisenhower's a real soldier. He'd seen warfare firsthand. The guys now that send people to war haven't. They're scarlet majors at the base, speeding glum heroes up the line to death. These are very nasty people. They don't have to go to war. They send young men. That needs to be paid for. Now, in the United Kingdom, we have a welfare state, which is a crazy system where you choose whether you want to work or not. You're probably just as well off if you've got a few children staying at home and not working. We have a national health system which is a complete and total laugh and disgrace. It's hopeless. We pump 120 billion pounds every year, and it's still not fit for purpose. So you have to keep turning this money machine all the time to cover it all up. Now, the problem that we have is that is it cock up or conspiracy? As you say, we don't know. When you were young, you thought it was conspiracy. Then you came away. Well, you know, I've been agonizing over this. I'm 71 and I've been agonizing over this for decades and decades. And when I went into politics for the first time, I came late because it was Brexit. I was a Brexiteer. I wanted to get self-government back to the United Kingdom. So it wasn't politics with a big P. I was a Brexiteer, sat as an independent and got elected on several occasions. So that was okay. But I have actually worked with politicians, very closely with politicians. And the thing that struck me more than anything else is their unbelievable stupidity. They are the most stupid group of people that I've ever met. And when they're in committee, they become even more stupid. And the decisions that committees make become doubly stupid. So they're incredibly stupid people. But we have to remember that they're the guys we see on TV. They're the guys that we actually think are running the country, the guys that we voted for. But we know they're not. We know they're not. These people don't. So who's running the system in the United Kingdom at the moment when it comes to this coronavirus business? It's people like Neil Ferguson, at the Professor Ferguson at the Imperial College, London University. He's a Marxist. We have people on the science committees who are self-confessed communists. So we know that Boris Johnson's a buffoon. We know that all the people around him are idiots, but they're not actually running anything at the moment. The people who are running it are people who have a political agenda. And it doesn't matter whether you're a fascist or a communist or whatever you are, you must break the system if you want to rebuild. And they're not even hiding that. They're talking about reset, the new normal, build back better. This is all about a form of communism, fascism, statism, That's what it's really all about, and that's what's driving it forward, not politicians themselves. And it was the same at the European Union. The Parliament was an amending chamber. The Parliament was an amending chamber. We didn't make any law. It was the people behind closed doors on the Commission that made the law. All we did was ratify it or not. And usually we ratified it. We ratified 95% of it. Then we tweaked it a little bit here and there. There's no political democratic dynamic in the European Union. It's run by civil servants and bureaucrats. And now they're not stupid. They're not stupid. They're extremely clever, and they have a goal and they have a mission. And that is not what people want. It's not democracy. It isn't representative democracy. It's not kind of any kind of democracy. It's being told what to do. And that is the problem. That's where it's part cock up and part conspiracy.
And why do you think these people, you know, the smart ones that have a large hand to play in how all of this unfolds, why do you think they are at cross purpose with let's say everyone else, you know, the common man and woman on the street? What is it, you know, because to my mind, and I think most people that are free market capitalist types, they think, well, a rising tide lifts all boats. Let's all just get on with the business of trying to live the best life we can in the freest form we can. And that, you know, that allows for prosperity, and that allows for everyone to be, you know, lifted out of poverty and all sorts of dynamism in an economy, et cetera. If you squash people's, if you alter the incentive structure of society, and of course, having a large centrally planned economy of the nature that most governments operate today certainly has a large effect on people's incentives. But if you screw with the money, if you screw with the government, if you screw with people's incentives, if you place restrictions on them, if you basically try to turn them into, you know, slaves, sheep, whatever you want to, however you want to characterize them, what ultimately is the benefit to anyone who would want to do that? Because, you know, if they do that, then their world becomes less dynamic as well, because, you know, what's the purpose of living amongst a group of people that are increasingly powerless?
It's a very good question. It's a very difficult question, but I think it's something to do with the educational system we've had since the war. People aren't trained in critical thinking. We have more people at university in the United Kingdom than ever before, but they're not trained in critical thinking. They're trained in educational box ticking. So when I lecture at universities, which I used to do quite a lot of, whether it's Cambridge, Durham, Oxford, you know, the top universities in the United Kingdom, and so on and so forth, the people that I speak to, the undergraduates that I speak to, feel that, have been brought up to believe that capitalism is a bad thing. Worse, they believe what we have in the United Kingdom is capitalism.
Right.
Because nobody's actually explained mercantilism to them. We don't have capitalism. There's only one true capitalist society since the war, and that was Hong Kong. And Hong Kong said, we'll make sure the drains work, and we'll look after any crime problems, but the rest of it, you get on with it. And you could go back in this country, for example, if you go back to the administration of Lord Salisbury in the 1880s and 1890s, a conservative prime minister, probably the best prime minister, peacetime prime minister we've ever had. And he described the role of government. And you can find it on the Oxford Book of Quotations, and I love it. He says that the job of Parliament is to facilitate the entrepreneurial spirit of the citizen. But no, we don't do that now. What we do is, what the government says is, we will look after your education, your social security, your pensions, your health. We will do everything for you. And that's a warm and comfortable thing. And that happened in 1945 with the card key election. We'll keep you nice and warm and cuddly. But in exchange for that, you mustn't do any thinking for yourself. You mustn't expect to keep your own money. We now have the highest tax take in the United Kingdom for 50 years. And if you add all the taxes together, income tax, national insurance tax, duty, petrol duty, booze duty, and all that, if you add all that together, an ordinary guy, a middle income, middle class guy, is losing 50% of his income every year. It's a huge figure. Some people sort of just think, but you see, the thing is that people in this country now don't associate the tax they pay with, they think the government has money, magic money of their own. And so they want the furlough payments, they want the grants, they want the tax relief, they want the welfare, because they are under the impression, and the educational system has done this, that somehow there's free money. And the people who actually run the system, the bureaucrats, believe that to be the case. So when you say, why do they think that? The point is because they are not critical thinkers. They don't think about where their salary comes from, their index-linked pensions, their wonderful, warm, comfortable life that they lead, unsackable in the public sector. You don't get sacked from the civil service in the United Kingdom. And I think your analogy, or if I may use an analogy here, and that is your 18th century, early 19th century doctor who would put leeches on anemic pregnant women. And when they died, because they were anemic and they lost even more blood that they didn't have to spare to the leeches, the doctor would chastise himself for not putting enough leeches on the pavement, on the patient. So when all this breaks down, when this all breaks down, the currency and the central banks, the problem will be they will all immediately think, the political class, that there wasn't enough state control. Not that there was too much state control, but there was not enough of it. And your man in the street will cry for more government action. The banks have gone bankrupt, the treasury, more government action. They will not for 1 minute think that the real situation is that there has been too much government, too much state control, and that's what caused it. Now, the people watching your show here, Bitcoiners and gold bugs, and we're cousins under the skin, whether Bitcoiners like it or not, we're cousins under the skin. Bitcoiners know this, which is why they're Bitcoiners. They've opted out of the system. They've taken their money out of the central banking system and fiat currency and put it into Bitcoin. And gold bugs have taken it out and put it into gold. So we all know that that's the right thing to do. But we are too few. I mean, the actual exposure to gold, for example, in the average portfolio, investment portfolio, is probably no more than 1% at best. When the country does wake up to this, it will be far too late, and all we will have is more state control, far more state control. I mean, if that's possible for the whole country in England at the moment under house arrest, it's even, if that is possible to have even more, we'll have even more. And the difference is they will come. They've already said they're coming for us. They're coming for whatever money is left. They're broke. Everybody's broke. The banks are broke. The only people who've got any little bit of money left are the English middle classes, and they will come for us.
Yeah. I totally agree with that characterization. And I've heard people say before, and I think I've probably said it, that I'm astounded at how little regard, respect, desire for, ambition for freedom that, people in the world today have. And my reasoning for that is seeing how egregiously their freedoms are being infringed upon in the past year. But then I came to realize that, if you have discussions with people and such, nobody's going to admit that they don't value freedom. The thing is, and I think, as you said, it, has largely to do with the educational system and the broader, the structural system that's predicated upon the money that the world has used for the last 100 years, is that people believe this is freedom, right? They believe that the government taking care of XYZ for them, telling them what they should do for their health, telling them, investing in this and that, providing these services. Basically, their default assumption is that I live in a free democracy, therefore I am free. Therefore, anything that happens in that free democracy is freedom, versus having an absolute understanding of what that might be, regardless of the movements or machinations of the state. I throughout this, trying to find a ray of light in this crisis, there's been a lot of good memes on the internet. I'm sure you've come across them, but one that I found striking was the founding fathers or the writers of the Constitution in the United States, right? And it's this big, celebratory moment where they're like, kind of standing. It's a formal painting. I don't know who did the painting, but they're basically saying, look at this amazing Constitution. This will be the bedrock of the free and open, prosperous society that we will build, on this land, sort of thing. And then at the bottom, the fine print was, just so we're clear, none of this matters if there's a virus that kills 0.1% of people.
Exactly.
And that kind of illustrates the absurdity of this. And I think it also illustrates that people have become so complacent that I think they're unaware of, if they ever were aware, but I think they're unaware of the necessity for absolutes in terms of structuring how we get on with each other as human beings. There needn't always be government. I think that will morph and change over time, but there will always be some form of governance, because that's how we determine the nature of our behavior with one another. And I think the Constitution in the United States was a great example of some really well thought out absolutes on which to structure a society, but almost being a victim of its own success. And then you could extend that all over the world, of course. A certain amount of complacency has descended upon people, where I think a lot of people wake up and they look out on the world and they say, they go to the grocery store and they watch their movie and they turn on their Netflix and they check their iPhone and check Instagram, and they just think this is reality. This is how reality is. And, why would it ever be anything different? And I don't think they give enough credit to, one, the process that it took to get, throughout the course of human history, to get to where they are, and the advantages and the things that they're able to avail of, but also what's necessary to keep that reality in its place and to keep pushing it forward. And and we live in an environment right now where it seems like that's being attacked from all angles. So as you said, of course, the government, anytime anyone has a money printer in the basement, they're always going to find reasons to use it. And if one group of people has a money printer and another group of people has to sell their time for money, the inevitable outcome is a relationship of slavery, of course. Right? The government, if one group of people doesn't have to work for the money the other do, a relationship of slavery develops. But in the education system and broader social context right now, there seems to be a drive toward undoing the absolutes of the past and disregarding the very things that allowed for, the prosperity and the freedoms that, over the last few hundred years have been established. And, I know this is a difficult question, but why do you is this just a cycle of kind of time, where good times create weak men and weak men create bad times and bad times strong men good times? Is this an inevitable cycle of human history, or do you think there's something else at play in your mind that's facilitating this complacency and unwinding things that have been established in the past?
I think probably it's cyclical. And if you look at history, and I'm a published historian as well, if you look at the cycles, I think it is a cyclical situation. And if you go back to the Enlightenment of the late 18th century and the early 19th century, but of course these people aren't being taught seriously anymore at the universities. And of course the academics have taken over the universities, and they are talking about, they are deciding the curriculum. So one undergraduate should be studying John Locke. They should be studying Herbert Spencer. They should be studying John Stuart Mill, Frederick Bastiat. And these are the people that they should be looking at. Exactly. And these people's ideas and attitudes, of course, stand the test of time. But they're not reading that. They're not reading that. In philosophy, they're reading people like Jean-Paul Sartre, who's a pygmy in compared with these people I've just mentioned. He's a pygmy in comparison with these people. And they're not getting that. And of course, because they don't have critical thinking, or they're not trained in critical thought, they're not digging it out for themselves. And if you were to advocate these people, you could guarantee that instead of every undergraduate wants a 2-1, a first or a 2-1. To get them on the rat race to get interviewed by the big business. If they want to go into big business, you need a first or a 2-1. If you were advocating Austrian school economics, reading economics at Durham University, you'd be lucky to get a 2-2. They would mark you down. In the same way at science, I had a word with at a public school just up the road where my family went to, or some of my family went to. I spoke to the science master, the head of science master, and I said, why are you perpetuating this nonsense that man-made carbon dioxide is somehow going to boil the planet, which is so absurd, it's laughable, and you're a scientist. He said, I have to do this because I'm paid for them to get their A levels to get into university. I have to teach fake science, otherwise they won't get an A plus and they won't get into university. And that's what the parents pay me for. And I thought, this is really straight out of 1930s Germany, it's straight out of the Soviet Union, and we've had that. But we've had generations of that. So young people today, they don't even think on the right lines. They're not even thinking on the right lines. But that will change. I think the cycle will change. When we have massive, nobody goes to the barricades with a full tummy. But when we have mass unemployment, and that's coming down the road when we have the collapse in the banking system, when this happens, people will start saying, how did we get here? Why wasn't I taught this at university? Why was I told only Keynesian economics? Why wasn't I taught Austrian school economics? Why did we get here? How did we get here? And that will have a whole shift back again. And I think there will be a new enlightenment. But what we've got to do, we've got to get rid of some of the steps. BBC, we have to get rid of the BBC. If you don't pay the BBC £150 a year, you could go to prison in the United Kingdom. There are hundreds of channels to watch, subscription, advertising, there's hundreds to choose from. But you go to prison if you don't pay the BBC. We're not just talking about philosophy here, we're talking about morality. That's immoral by anybody's standards. But if you ask the average Joe, they don't like writing a check for 150 quid, but they go on doing it. They go on doing it because the United Kingdom now is a nation of sheep. I don't know how they got here. I don't know how they managed to get themselves into this spiral of apathy and despair, which is where most people are at the moment. And if you talk about liberty, freedom of thought, so on and so forth, which of course started. You don't have to go that far back really historically. Let's go back to the 1688, 1689 Bill of Rights, the Toleration Acts, which of course is what the American Constitution was built on. The reason that the Americans revolted against the British Empire, because they weren't getting the benefits that were happening back in the United Kingdom of the benefits of the Bill of Rights. Then, of course, we have things like writs of habeas corpus, these things, these freedoms which have evolved over a period of time. All now thrown to the wind. The Julian Assange case, for example, he's been held without writ of habeas corpus now for years. He's just been, there is no real reason to hold him any longer. There's no reason. But it's a deal with the Americans. It's a deal basically between the CIA, which is possibly one of the most evil organizations in the history of the world, the CIA and MI5. They're getting together because he blew the whistle. Whistleblower, don't be a whistleblower. You lose your job straight away. That's if you don't get locked up. There are lots of national health doctors and nurses who are saying, this is crazy, this is nonsense. What we're doing is nonsense. But they don't, even in this country, are not allowed to give their name because they will be on disciplinary procedure. So we now have somehow morphed, and COVID, or call it coronavirus, whatever you want to call it, has done this. And every time the state get an opportunity to crush people, they do. The war against terrorism, for example, what a gift that was in order to take away people's freedom. The home security people, and it's all for. And as I've said this many times before, your medieval king would take your money and take your land and take your cattle for his own personal benefit. He was a thief. He was a thief, but he was an honest thief. He didn't pretend it was for your own benefit. The state today takes away virtually everything you have. They mug you, they bash you over the head, they take your money, but before they go away, they whisper in your ear, it's in a good cause. It's in a good cause. This is for your benefit and your family's benefit as you lie bleeding in the gutter, having had all your money taken off you. It's for your own good. And the funny thing is, the majority of people in the United Kingdom actually believe it is for their own good. What can you do?
Yeah, it's such a peculiar circumstance we find ourselves in. And I've been saying a lot lately, just because I believe it to be so true that, you mentioned the medieval era. when we study the medieval era and we see the pictures and the paintings and the representations of that period, it's always, the king in his castle with the crown and, abundance and everything. And the people outside the castle walls, despondent and, melancholy and no smiling and dirty. And, that's our conception of that era. Now, what it was really like, who knows? Certainly the people at the time probably didn't think it was as bad as we now see it. And that is precisely the scenario that I think history will look back on this period. I mean, we look around the world today and we see how despondent and how many mental health issues there are and how much, just general unhappiness and oppression that there is. And somehow that's not motivating enough for us to think, why is it this way? And what might we do to make it different? And instead people just accept it. And I think that's why at this period now, 200 years from now or less or more or whatever, we'll look back on and it will become so obvious the oppression and the effects of that oppression that had on individuals' lives and their state of happiness and their mental health, et cetera. But it'll only be told in hindsight. And I find it so interesting these days. Like I can, and often do, sit in front of my peers, and I try not, you're talking about you can get fired, you can get put in jail, whatever, for just articulating some point of disagreement with fill in the blank policy of the state. But let's say in the last 12 months with the handling of the quote unquote pandemic, even in this country, in Canada, a provincial premier, which is, a high position, and, cabinet members and other, duly elected politicians, some of them have spoken up, particularly in the more conservative provinces in this country, and said, guys, look, okay, this virus is something that maybe is deserving of a state response, but we can't do so exclusively or without consideration for all the downstream effects of what that response might impact, what the impact of that response might be. And they've been eviscerated in the media by their political opponents and by the common man or woman on the street, which is crazy to me. All they're saying is, hey, are there things that we're not considering here? Let's look at the other damaging effects that this centralized imposition of quote unquote solutions is having. Let's look at that because it's real. Suicides and not getting your diagnoses from, the hospital because you're put on a longer wait list and all this kind of stuff. It's real. And then, the point I was going to make about what I talk to my peers about is I tell them truthfully and calmly and without that much enthusiasm how the paper money, the fiat money system works around the globe today. And that when the government says they're going to do a $2 trillion stimulus package or a $500 billion, whatever, all that means is that they're pressing a button and stealing from you. That's all it means. There's no other way around that. And not only are they stealing from you, but they're going to ask for it back more in taxes in the future. And I can look at people in the face and directly say this, and it elicits no response. It elicits a shoulder shrug and like, oh, well, what are you going to do? And that characterizes the general malaise, I think, that most people feel today, is that I think the nature of this money system that we have, the way in which it unavoidably centralizes power, has bred a society of people that even if they don't tacitly or clearly understand that relationship, obviously it's had tremendous effects on them, right? Let's say subconscious effects on them, to the point that I think that when they're confronted with some of the truths, some of the reality of how this system operates and the impacts that it may have on them, they can't muster much of a response beyond apathy. And that is the big challenge here. Now, as you rightly said, Bitcoiners, gold bugs, and maybe some other class of people, these are the people that I think are recognizing the problems and saying, fuck that. That's not the life that I want. That's not the life that I want for my family. So I'm going to try to find a way to mitigate the negative effects that crazy system has on me and work with my peers to build something better, to build maybe a parallel economy. But to my earlier question is, does this existing system need to completely fail for that apathy to be shaken out of people, and for them to see, you know, the errors and the egregious infringements that that have been conducted under the guise of this system before they are motivated to change? In your opinion, you know, does it all have to kind of come crashing down before that apathy is dissolved?
I'm sad to say I think it does, because I think people are going to have to start suffering. As I say, nobody goes to the barricades with a full tummy.
Yeah.
And I think there'll be lots of things that how will history judge a lot of this? Well, certainly when it comes to the net zero, the climate change, the carbon dioxide thing, history will look back in much the same way today we look back on the Catholic Church in the Renaissance and their treatment of Galileo and Nicholas Copernicus. We look back at that and we go, oh God, you couldn't say, you had the sun went round the earth, and there was no way if you didn't agree with that the received wisdom, you'd be put on the rack or beheaded or something. And we know that to be the case. And of course, round about that era, of course, we were still burning witches. And what we have now is the equivalent of if you speak out against the system, if you speak out against the fake science, which is what we're dealing with most of the time. And it gets fake science is very easy if you have an uneducated population. We have a population which hasn't had the benefit of a traditional education. They've got a certificate on the wall. They've got a certificate on the wall that shows that they attended some school or university, but they're not educated people. They wouldn't last 2 seconds in an interview with you like this. They just wouldn't last 2 seconds without showing themselves to be men, probably nice men and women, but of no serious education, how I would judge it as a man of my age. So this is one of the problems that we have, how we'll be seen cyclically historically. And if you look at the late medieval system, which we were talking about, the king in his castle, the poor man at his gate. When we look at that, yes, okay, that's the late Middle Ages. But what people tend to overlook a little bit is the early Middle Ages of the Anglo-Saxon era. Now, a lot of our laws actually Magna Carta, for example, didn't come from the Normans, the Plantagenets. It came from the Anglo-Saxon era. And the concept of natural justice, which came with the Anglo-Saxons, and the idea of common law goes back then. People think that it goes back to the Magna Carta. It goes back hundreds of years before that. And the whole concept of natural law was that your thirdings, or whatever you want to call them, whatever the historical term was at the time, your village, which were bigger villages then because it was a rural society, they made their own rules, and they judged their own felons and miscreants and so on and so forth within the community. And that's where common law comes from, not statute law. Statute law is something that came much later. And of course, you lose the wisdom of generations of common law, where you can look back over common law and you can see that nothing's new, and that's come up before, and this is how it was dealt with. So you have the wisdom of generations of men. Now with statute law, which is corpus juris in the European Union system, they make law. They make thousands of laws every year, which is why you end up in this absurd situation where you can't do anything in Europe without a little man ticking a box to make sure you've done right. There are more people ticking boxes than actually creating anything. The wealth creation section now is getting so small, it can't support the weight of the public sector, because the public sector is better paid with better pensions. They're unsackable. And sooner or later, the town hall and Whitehall are going to swamp it, which of course, Lord Salisbury, going back all that time, he said another wonderful thing. He said, the more people you have in government, the more they will build their empire. They will build more people around them, and the people around them will build more people around them. That's the virus that we have here, not coronavirus. We have a virus in the public sector, and it's going exponentially all the time. We just got to stop. We can't all work for the bloody government. So somebody's actually got to put a shelf up or make a car. Somebody's actually got to do something.
Yeah, I mean,
we're just not going that route at the moment. But the reason I think it is cyclical, John, is because it has to be. It has to be. If it can't go on, it won't go on.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that characterization. It's just, it's too bad. I guess it's a tragedy of history. Maybe it's something inherent in our psychology that makes it forever the case that we have to wait for things get so bad and to collapse before we're motivated for action and change. And I totally agree with your characterization. The state is the virus, and when you have the state jobs that are not only protected but that are, the worse things get, the more people call out for state intervention. So the state necessarily has to grow until the virus kills the host. And it's a shame that we have to bring it to that end. But the other, living in this paradigm, this world that we have right now, the thing that's so bothersome is that because of the way that the power centralizes under the current financial system and system of governance, the fears, the morality, the values of the people that have concentrated that power at the top are imposed on everyone else that is below them. And so that's why, we can have, look, I'm not an expert in the climate change thing. I'm highly skeptical of the motivations and the narrative that's being pushed almost exclusively around the world today. But whether or not that's true, the fact is that when you have such centralized power and control, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It'll affect the lives of billions of people just because it's the conclusion or it's the narrative that centralized point of power and control has conjured up, whether through good intentions or bad. Everyone is subject to them. And that's a real travesty, because it obviously infringes on and detracts from the degree of freedom that people can feel. And look, the last year, it has been an interesting one, and I think will be an interesting one to study in hindsight. But some people have enjoyed the extra time at home to watch Netflix and surf on the internet and stuff, and fair play. But a lot of other people have been incredibly have experienced a lot of emotional turmoil by such an overt infringement of their freedom and containment of their movement, and and the mask wearing and all this kind of stuff. And as we were saying about, what's it going to take for people to take action, for that apathy to be, for people to shake themselves out of the apathy. I suspect the typical legacy financial world and the government will continue doing what they've done until it reaches a point where maybe they can no longer do so. But what I have noticed, and this is a point of discussion where let's break into solutions to these problems we've been identifying, is that a lot of people, in seeing these solutions and being unhappy about them, are starting to ask the question, how can I push back? How is there a life raft? Is there a parallel system? Is there a community of people or an asset that I can protect my wealth and that kind of stuff? And that's where people are looking at things like gold and increasingly things like Bitcoin and saying, this is the way that we take our freedom back. This is the way that we take our sovereignty back. And most Bitcoiners understand that could very well be a hell of a fight. Because the quote unquote powers that be, again, whether in the conspiracy domain or just incompetence and a manifestation of the existing structure of the system, whatever it may be, they will unlikely relinquish power and control that they've generated easily. And so there's a very adversarial ethos in the Bitcoin community. And I'd love to know, from your perspective, what first drew you to looking at Bitcoin and taking it seriously? Because, to be frank, people in your demographic often will dismiss it either because it's too unknown, it's not in their wheelhouse, and they don't want to spend the time to learn about it, or it's dismissed by your peers, and that causes people to dismiss it. Now, I'm not suggesting you're one of those people. I know you seem to be a very independent thinker, so I don't think your peers would put much pressure on you in that regard. But what was it that inspired you to have a serious look at Bitcoin?
Well, it's interesting because I've been not an investor until October, but I've been looking at Bitcoin. And of course, I'm totally committed to moving whatever I can out of the state system, which of course I know is heading for the rocks. It's a lifeboat, isn't it? I mean, gold or Bitcoin is your lifeboat. The ship is sinking, a lifeboat. And so that lifeboat over there might look a little more stable than that lifeboat over there. You don't really know. And that's a personal judgment that we all make. Now, funnily enough, Claudio Grass, in Switzerland, who is a fellow gold bug and well known in Switzerland and quite a senior guy who I've worked with before, and Alistair MacLeod, and some very very powerful intellects on the gold bug side. I was talking to him and I was saying, being a professional fund manager, I believe in diversification. You cannot have one asset class. It's a very dangerous game to play. And I have found a little bit, since I've got a lot of interaction with Bitcoiners, it's something that they don't fully understand. Because when I look at Bitcoiners, they're nice, they're articulate, but they're not professional fund managers. They know the way things are going. They might be musicians. They might be all sorts of different surgeons. They could be different professions, but they're not professionals in the investment world. So they don't fully understand the concept of diversification. And I do. And suddenly I realized that I was actually saying, you know, don't do what I do what I say. Here I was with something like 70% of my net assets in gold, in specie, of course. I'm not stupid, not ETFs, you know, not bank chits pretending they've got the gold, which is of course what ETFs are. The real McCoy in a safe in London. Don't come down here, anybody watching. I don't have it here. Don't rob me here. You know, it's not here. It's in London in an independent vault, family vault. So that's what it is. And Claudio Grass, he said, we were discussing this, and he said, yes, you're right. He said, I would suggest to you, he's a much younger man than me, I would suggest to you that you get some Bitcoin, because we're coming to an era now where it's actually more risky not to have Bitcoin than to have it. And I looked at it and I thought, yeah, you're right. You're right. It is more risky not to, if you don't have Bitcoin, you're taking a big risk. And if you look at gold, for example, which, as I say, I wish I could persuade some Bitcoiners to stop this. You know, it's got to be one thing or it's got to be the other. But if you take a gold sovereign, which is, you know, and I show this if I'm lecturing at universities, I happen to have a gold sovereign with 1905. It's a 1905 sovereign, but it doesn't really matter. This sovereign, I said, with 1905 would buy you bed and breakfast in London. Then a sovereign, that's what it would buy you. And it will buy you that today in London. It will buy you that today. And the interesting thing about that gold sovereign, it will buy you bed and breakfast in every capital city in the world. That gold coin in your pocket, that's what it will buy you. And any hotel manager will accept it. He might run out and change it himself, or he will facilitate that. Let's put it that way. And so we know, and it's been like that for 5,000 years. And another thing that people make the mistake of, gold bugs sometimes, not all gold bugs, but some gold bugs, they believe that gold is an investment. Now, that's the wrong way to look at gold. People make this mistake. Gold is not an investment. Gold is a wealth retainer. It means that it's time preference. It means that that gold that you have today will buy in 100 years what it bought, you know, today. It'll buy that in 100 years' time. It isn't an investment. It's protection of wealth. It's a protection of money. Gold is money, as JP Morgan said over 100 years ago. Only gold really is money. And that's before crypto was invented or thought of or even conceived of. How could it be? Now we have a different player on the block, and we have crypto and Bitcoin, which can't be degraded because it's finite. Some Bitcoiners say, oh, yes, but I mean, gold is mined. The amount of gold which is actually mined as a ratio with the population is tiny, you know, tiny. Gold mining doesn't degrade the value of gold. What degrades the value of gold is criminal activities on Wall Street, selling and buying paper, which isn't gold, manipulating the price. And that's been going on for decades with the compliance of the state and central banks. Well, they would, wouldn't they? And the SEC. You couldn't do that with any other commodity other than gold because they don't want people to buy. The true price of gold would be much nearer $4,000 an ounce if it hadn't been manipulated. We all know, of course, that that will finish. You can't cheat forever. Sooner or later, the music will stop. Now, Bitcoin is still very small. You know, when it comes to the people who hold it, the number of people who hold it, the amount of holdings. But I would suggest, and you're more expert in this than me, but looking at it from a research economist perspective, I would expect it to go to about 5 trillion in a few years' time. And I wouldn't be surprised if it went to $10 trillion in its turnover value. Now that presents a danger because, as you rightly said earlier, the central banks and politicians and bureaucrats, they won't give up this control easily. They won't give up this control easily. Bitcoin is to be feared, and the only way that can be overcome is not so much for individuals to hold it per se, although that's good. It's got to be big business. At the moment, we live in a cartel with politicians, banks, and big business. If big business takes on board Bitcoin, and it's just starting to look like it might, it's just beginning to start, it looks like, then you'll see the crooks, the gangsters who are big business and banks and politicians, all gangsters, they're all crooks, they're all sociopaths. When they split down the middle, when big business says we cannot overlook Bitcoin. You know, Bitcoin is now too big. We have to be part of the Bitcoin game. And the banks and the politicians will then have to concede that, but they won't concede that lightly. That won't be easy. And there's a fight coming down. There will be a fight. The bigger and more popular Bitcoin gets, the bigger the fight will be and the more bloody.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to respond to there. I agree with a lot of your characterizations. I was a gold bug myself before coming to Bitcoin, so I understand the thesis of Bitcoin. And I would push back. I think a lot of Bitcoiners do understand the benefits and the thinking behind diversification. I just think there's a zealotry in Bitcoin, and it is a zealotry around freedom. And Bitcoiners are, and I know you're starting to interact with them now, and that's great, but they are an incredible group of people insofar as they are basically the antithesis of the people that we were characterizing a bit earlier. They have taken it upon themselves to study extensively monetary history, world history, politics, and they don't want to delude themselves about what this thing is. And I think the more you go down the proverbial Bitcoin rabbit hole, you learn more about, and also the money rabbit hole. That is one of the fundamental things to understand here. What is money? What is the influence of the money in use in a given society on human flourishing, human freedom, prosperity? There's a lot of direct implications there that are necessary to understand if you're going to appreciate what the different forms of money that have emerged throughout history foster in terms of a market and a society, and et cetera. So I think it's more that, one, they're all in on this revolution. They understand the stakes involved. They understand what they're up against. And they are putting all their eggs in one basket because they think that's basically the only basket where their wealth will be secure. Now, everyone has to come to that decision on their own. Different demographics, different ages, different living in different places in the world will mean that you manage your assets and your portfolio differently, of course. But I think they understand diversification. It's just that they're so ideologically, philosophically all in on this, what I think is a genuine revolution, that's why they're taking that approach. In terms of comparison between the two, look, I think we judge monies on their monetary attributes, and I in particular look at money in a sense. I mean, I guess I look at it in many ways, but what is the nature of the strength and the versatility of your claim on your money? And then beyond that, what is the optionality that money provides? i.e., where can you use it? How can you transport it? How can you maintain your ownership of it? How can you secure it, et cetera? And, I think, again, being that I was a gold bug earlier in my life, I realized that gold was a market-derived money. You needed to actually work to produce it. And, the difference between its production price and its market price was such that it was a fairly good money. There wasn't much seigniorage in gold, and it was a good way to preserve your capital. Now, I think Bitcoin's monetary attributes exceed gold's on nearly every metric. I think of gold, and I know you'll probably want to push back on this, so give me a chance here. But I think gold is more an insurance policy against Bitcoin failing. You know, Bitcoin is 12 years old. It's a digital monetary network. It could fail. I think with each passing day that becomes less and less likely, but of course it's possible. And the next soundest money, the next best money after Bitcoin, I would say, is gold. But of course, gold has that problem being that it's physical of centralization. And even though gold has retained its value throughout several thousand years, I'm sure it's not lost on Bitcoiners, especially, that gold, because it's centralized, it's been more prone to confiscation. It's been more prone to state co-option, and it's in terms of what I was saying about the versatility and the strength and the optionality of the claim on that asset. It's more restrictive. For example, you said your gold could be spent in any major city across the world. Well, yeah, but what if you can't get on a plane with your gold? Well, then that strategy goes out the window. So being that Bitcoin is just purely information ultimately, and that it can be stored in your head if need be, this gives it a high degree of portability and optionality, in addition to its other monetary attributes of absolute scarcity and soundness, et cetera. So I think Bitcoiners are very well aware of why gold is valuable. And that the funny thing with a lot of gold bugs, especially the ones that you said, kind of push back on Bitcoin, is it almost seems that they don't understand why gold became money in the first place. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners do, and they're looking at it looking at each of their merits. And they're just deciding that one, gold offers more Bitcoin offers more optionality. And as you say, they have been engaging with Bitcoin almost from day one, under the premise that this is an incredibly disruptive technology to the existing power structure, and it's likely, or it's possible, even probable, that there will be a big fight for this territory, right? That there will be a lot of pushback against Bitcoiners, which is why solutions are being developed. The technology is constantly evolving to resist the different attack vectors that may come from the state, that may come from other market participants, that may come from one's own stupidity about engaging in this thing. All of this can be, because it's a technology, it can be constantly updated and improved dependent upon the vulnerabilities that emerge, that the market becomes aware of. And so for those reasons, I think Bitcoiners just say, this is the battle line. This is the weapon of choice for the battle that we're moving into. And that's why I think they go so all in. And that's why, I don't think many Bitcoiners really care whether you invest in gold or Tesla or Bitcoin or whatever. I think they just say that if you recognize the battle that lies ahead and the different attack vectors that battle may emerge in that battle, then Bitcoin is by far the best weapon to fight that battle.
I don't disagree with any of that at all. With one of the problems with gold, as you rightly say, is it is relatively easily confiscated by the state. And we've seen that, and of course, in 1720, we saw the French government confiscate gold in the time of the crisis, John Law's crisis, the Mississippi bubble. We saw them do that. We saw President Roosevelt steal the American public's gold by making it illegal to hold it, confiscating it, and then recalibrating it price-wise in the dollar just a year or so later. The biggest heist in history. But of course, this funny thing is with American presidents, how they're eulogized by people. I mean, he was just a robber, but he's still on a platform as being one of the great American presidents. He was actually a thief, but that's neither here nor there. So yes, and of course we saw in Nazi Germany, gold was confiscated because it's a physical asset. All of which I understand, and I'm very aware of that. And it's interesting that my gold, although it's in a private vault in London, and it's one of the most advanced electronic vaults. It's got keys, it's got thumbprints, it's got all the stuff that you would expect. And you would think it couldn't be stolen. Well, it can't be stolen, or it's very difficult to steal that if you're a robber. It's very easy for the state to do that. They don't need the key because they've got me, and they've got a politicized police force. And they can hold me in solitary confinement until I give them the key, because they know I've bought gold. because they can if you buy over £10,000 in the UK, it's registered by the Financial Services Authority. This is to stop drug money, you see. It's not to steal honest citizens' money, it's to stop drug running. Right. Bullshit, you know. That's so they know where it is when they come for it and they want to steal it, and one day they will. And I understand that is a problem. That is a problem with gold. Now, I know that there's very sophisticated Bitcoin. It's getting more sophisticated all the time. You hold it in your wallet. It's terribly complex. I mean, I've got a young colleague in my office here who does most of it for me because I've got it's over my head. He types it all in. It's my wallet, but he does all the clever stuff. And so that's absolutely fine. And he brought me, he's a Bitcoiner himself, great guy. And he looks after me in these matters. But I think when you're talking to me here under house arrest by the state, who have suspended habeas corpus for certain political enemies, Julius Assange being, you know, the main one, it doesn't matter how sophisticated my wallet is and my passwords and all the rest of it. If they can take me or my family away and lock us up until I hand over my Bitcoin. And there's no, another thing that's gone by the board with both the IRS and HMRC here, and that is the presumption of innocence, which is a fundamental principle of English law, has gone. So we've lost presumption of innocence and habeas corpus if it suits the government, right? So you can have the most sophisticated Bitcoin wallet you like, but if they kick down the door, shoot the dog, take you away and lock you up until you hand it over, it's just as stealable. There is nothing in the world that has been invented that the government can't steal. Doesn't matter what it is. They can steal it if they've a mind to. So I think that is no danger at the moment. And I think in this country, I don't think there's any danger of confiscation of gold at this stage. It may not come in my lifetime. And again, it brings us on to time horizon. My wife is much younger, so I have to make allowance for our savings and our portfolios to look after her and her appallingly extravagant habits with horses and horse boxes and stable yards and all the rest of it. I have to make sure that that can continue when I've fallen off my perch. So consequently, but for me, that's gold suits her because she would never be wanting to cash it all in. She would just take into any town a gold sovereign or a gold Britannia, hand it over to any little dealer, gold dealer, who will buy it at spot minus 2%. So she can do that once a month, and that's her income for the rest of her need. So it's very much what we need for her. Now, if my time horizon was longer, let's say that I was your age, for example, it would not be 70% gold and a very small and silver and a small amount of Bitcoin. It would be very much nearer 60-40. I would have a much bigger Bitcoin holding because my time expectancy would be much longer. And so that would suit me fine. But of course, at the moment, that's peeping into chapter 2 of this whole thing. And so consequently, most Bitcoiners are younger, and therefore, like equities, no different from equities. If you want equities to work, when I was fund managing, or I was fixed interest, don't ever expect an equity portfolio to start working under 7 years. You're fooling yourself. It has to be 7 years. Otherwise, it's a mug's game. You've got to roll away those spikes and dips. You've got to roll all that away. So yes, I believe in Bitcoin, I think. But when it comes to what I would like to see and what would give me renewed or increased confidence, as it were, and I'm already buying, I'm already adding to Bitcoin. So I've got enough confidence to be buying. Mm-hmm. I would love to see Mercedes, for example, for want of a big international automobile manufacturer, say, we will now accept Bitcoin for our cars. Because the problem that we have at the moment, and this is true of gold as well, of course, if you want to buy anything, you then have to turn it back into fiat currency to buy that commodity or that service. And that's a fundamental weakness. And until that's gone, we need to acknowledge that that's a problem. We need to acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. And I think we're maybe getting closer to that, John. We might be getting closer to that. And I think perhaps the first, when I looked at an interview with the the Kaiser, Max Kaiser, he was being interviewed a couple of weeks ago. You probably saw it, and he was being interviewed about Bitcoin. I think Alex McLeod was on there. He was a gold bug. Anyway, it wasn't a gold versus Bitcoin argument. No, it wasn't. Anyway, somebody asked Max Kaiser, who's been a Bitcoin bug for many years, that you must have squillions of it, Max. You must have loads and loads and loads of it. And he gave a rather wry smile, which meant, yes, I do have squillions of it. Thank you very much. Yes, loads and loads. Aren't I clever? But then she asked a bit of a killer question. What are you going to do with it? He didn't really know what he was going to do with it, but he had lots and lots and lots of it. So he obviously got it up his screen every now and again and saw that he had squillions and squillions. But of course, if he wants to buy anything, if he wants to buy a huge ranch in Texas, he has to change it back into dollars. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a couple of things I'd like to address there, but first on the Max Kaiser example, I think what we're seeing, and this relates to gold and Bitcoin, is we're seeing a kind of Gresham's law in action, right? People are spending the fiat that's depreciating at a ever increasing rate and hoarding the good money, and that's a rational thing to do. So that's part of the reason. Another part of the reason is that what I think most Bitcoiners would agree with me here is that we're seeing the monetization, the global monetization of a new form of money. And, I often cast my mind's eye back to what the world must have looked like when gold was first monetized. But of course, it was monetized in different eras and periods in different places, in the Middle East, Fertile Crescent versus, South America versus wherever. Right now, we have a globally connected world, and we're seeing the simultaneous monetization throughout the world of a new form of money. And because of that, and as you said, I agree with you that money is not supposed to be an investment. Money is supposed to preserve the value of work done and be the instrument of expressing your will in the world. However, in the period, if you find yourself in an era where a new form of money is monetizing, which is an exceedingly rare period of history to exist in, then the smart thing to do is to accumulate as much of it as possible as it monetizes and not spend it until it's done that process. Because if you do, the opportunity cost of doing so will be leaving a lot on the table, because you'll be spending it before it's properly monetized. And for it to monetize, especially if it's an absolutely scarce money, the supply can't adjust, so the price has to adjust upward. And I think that's a lot of the reason why Bitcoiners are holding on very tight to their Bitcoin, is because, they realize the process that's at play here, and they don't want to spend it into the market too soon. They'll spend the dirty fiat first and hoard the Bitcoin. However, that being said, most people, well, two things. One, actually right now, yesterday and today, MicroStrategy, I'm not sure if you heard of them. In the fall, their CEO came out. It's a publicly listed company on the NASDAQ. And Bitcoiners had always assumed that companies would start dipping their toes in the water and maybe putting some on their balance sheet. This guy, tech company, fell down the rabbit hole during the lockdowns in March and ended up putting all of their corporate treasury to the tune of $500 million into Bitcoin, and then raised another $650 million around Christmas time in convertible debt to put into Bitcoin as well. And it's an ongoing strategy. So they put another 10 million last week. And anyways, they're hosting a conference this week that is purely designed to, it's a free conference where they open their playbook to other corporate institutions around the world to say, this is why we adopted a Bitcoin standard as a company for our corporate treasury. This is how you can do it from legal, accounting treatment, et cetera, should you want to do that. So to your point, and this is also part of resisting the state attack vector, is the more distributed this thing is, the more companies, the more politicians, the more high net worth individuals, the more people all over the world that adopt this thing, of course, the harder it is to criminalize it and to, call it purely the domain of drug dealers and pornographers and that kind of stuff. So that's happening right now. And the third thing about the spending is that even though there's not very much desire for Bitcoiners, regardless of how much wealth they've accumulated in Bitcoin, to spend it. One, of course, you could convert it back into fiat, as you said, and spend it. But more importantly, we're entering an era where because of the development of the technology, and I won't go in too much into the weeds on this here, but using something called the Lightning Network, which is basically just a layer on top of the Bitcoin network connected to it, spending has become a lot easier and a lot cheaper, and interoperability with the existing legacy banking system is being established now as well. And I got to do a shout out to my boy Jack Mahlers at LN Strike, a company that's doing a lot of great work in this area. So I think the spending is there now if wanted. There's just not much will to do it. And that's why we're seeing more hoarding than spending. And I think a lot of bigger players are coming onto this. Another thing I wanted to mention is what's interesting about Bitcoin. And when we talk about this adversarial nature of, people that are adopting this vis-a-vis a state that might seek to control it or push back in the future, I agree that, the state could knock on your door, put a gun in your face and say, we're going to hold you in a jail cell until you give up the keys to your Bitcoin, or, tell us where your gold is, right? That's power. And that's always been the case. The interesting distinction here from how it's always been the case is that almost all throughout history, if people didn't give up their wealth, their home, their gold, their assets, whatever, you could kill them and take it. And that's, that is largely the story of history, whether it's country versus country or state versus individual, et cetera. With Bitcoin, because it's information, you could try to coerce somebody to give up their keys. But if they decide not to do that, if they just, for whatever reason, there's not an avenue. If it's treated properly, there's different ways to custody your Bitcoin and treat it. So I want to be clear here. If you use it to its maximal abilities, let's say what it allows for, then someone could try to coerce you, and they could even take your life if you're willing to sacrifice it. But that doesn't necessarily mean they could get the asset. And there's a book behind me, The Sovereign Individual, and it talks about in that book the logic of violence and how that's a big driver of how the structure of society changes throughout the course of history, and how technology influences the imbalance of power between state and individual, or individual versus individual, or state versus state, et cetera. And I think that's an important distinction, is that the state can coerce anybody, but it doesn't. With Bitcoin being information, it doesn't necessarily mean that should they go all the way and take your life, that they can get your Bitcoin. And I think that changes the incentives for using force to try to access Bitcoin. And finally, on that point, Bitcoiners, like I said before, they're kind of ride or die about this thing. And I think many Bitcoiners think in terms of, in this interim transitionary period, I may have to be extremely mobile, and lockdowns influence that, but certainly the nature of your capital and your savings influence that. And I think, they're willing to move to foreign countries, they're willing to uproot their families and this kind of stuff in order to preserve their freedom and preserve the value of their capital. And I think that's what we'll increasingly see, a migration towards areas that are more promoting of freedom, versus, areas, let's say California or other countries that are more imposing greater and greater, the state is a greater and greater imposition on them. And the last one, which may trigger you a little bit, but I think this is what I think is going to play out. Gold's had a glorious run for the last 5,000 years. A big fan of the role it's played. And interestingly, and I think this is a part of history that a lot of people would do well to study, is what kind of societies emerged from, markets using gold as money versus seashells as money versus fiat currency as money. And I think it's a pretty easy argument to make that you go through history and you look at the societies that have used gold as money, and they flourished relative to the other forms of money that have been used elsewhere. But I liken it to horses and the motor vehicle. Horses were the mode of transportation for 10,000 plus years of human history. They were fundamental to transportation and sovereignty, and the ability to move yourself through space for human beings for a large part of history. And then the motor vehicle came around, and it did that better. I think it would have been impossible at that time to think, well, horses aren't going away. Surely they've been with us for so long. but technology is such that it obsoletes lesser technologies. And like I said, I think that may be the case with gold. And so as long as it's been around, and in the macro environment we're in right now, it's almost inconceivable to think that gold won't appreciate against the backdrop of all this money printing, et cetera. But if I were a gold investor, which I'm not, I would be wary of this technological shift that may obsolete much of the monetary investment case or the monetary use case for gold. And I think what we may see after, in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years is gold being reduced down to a more industrial metal, because of course it has many uses there, and maybe and jewelry, etc. But losing in a more digital era, in a vastly different environment that we're moving into, lose its monetary value, kind of in the way that horses and motor vehicles, the dynamic that played out there. So that's what I would think is food for thought for people that are looking at gold and Bitcoin and other ways to store the value they've accumulated.
Yes, I don't dispute any of that. It's perfectly fair assessment of probably what I think will happen in the longer term. Obviously, as you can probably see from my wrinkles, the longer term isn't my game, notwithstanding the young wife. Yeah, all of that's fair. All that's very fair. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
which,
please.
Now, we have a situation with gold where the price of my gold in my vault is not controlled by people buying and selling gold. It's controlled by the fake paper market, and 800, I think. In my book, I think it was 600. I did some research on this in my book. It was 600 pieces of paper to one piece of gold. And of course, that's where we're seeing it trade backwards and forwards quite fraudulently at the moment. And funnily enough, only today, I think it was Egan, what's his name, on with Max Kaiser, talking about the manipulation of the price of gold and how sooner or later people will want good delivery. Sooner or later, this will crash. It could not be this year, next year, but sooner or later, gold will find its real value, its real monetary value. It has to. It seems to me, let me just put this to you. Let's say the BlackRock decide to run a crypto fund. They've got a crypto fund. You go into an advisor of BlackRock or one of BlackRock's cronies or part of the overall syndicate, and the punter goes in and says, I'd like to buy, I need to get into Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the way forward. I've heard about it at the pub and so on. Even that fat idiot Bloom has bought some Bitcoin. So there must be something going on here. I want a piece of that. So he goes in and the guy says to him, and I can see this in my mind's eye very clearly, yes, indeed, Bitcoin's, the main leader, but there are other cryptocurrencies. Would you like to buy into our professionally managed expert fund of cryptocurrencies? And he said, well, that sounds good. He said, how much do you like to start with? Let's say £10,000 worth, just to start with. Okay, he said, yes, I can transfer that into your account. That's no problem at all. That's done. And we'll buy those units today. Now, no Bitcoin has been bought any more than if you went in and asked the guy for gold, would he have bought you gold? He would have sold you an ETF. It is possible, and I never confuse impossible with improbable. It's a dangerous mistake to make in the investment world. You could find that the world and his wife, small saver, and we've just seen some interesting stuff in the silver market, the world and his wife might rely on his financial advisor to go into the crypto fund, which is professionally managed. He doesn't fully understand it. It's very easy. He doesn't have to involve himself in anything really at all. And so you find that it could get to the stage where a market is being made, book is being made on cryptocurrencies, which is actually governing the price, not the trade of the price. How would you suggest to me that can't happen?
Yeah, so I take your point about the gold market, and what most people, as you said earlier, you own gold in specie, and that was always how I did it as well, because otherwise you have a claim on price exposure, and the risk there is the counterparty risk of the bank. If they become insolvent, then they can't fulfill that claim, and you never had gold in the first place, and now you don't even have a means of whatever difference in the price there was since you purchased it. So I agree that those shenanigans can happen. They probably are happening to some degree right now. But the important distinction here, and this is why the excuse me, the Bitcoin community can be so abrasive to people that are coming in, and can be so absolute to people coming in, and that's some people have an aversion to that. I think it's a feature, not a bug, in articulating best practices to people that come into the space, so that one, as an individual, you're not subject to the shenanigans that may go on in the space, but two, we build this network of both technology and people in a manner that it's less susceptible to the types of shenanigans you just articulated. One of the ways of doing that, and one of the things that's suggested to people, is that unlike gold, assaying gold, let's say, verify, possessing it yourself and verifying that it's not tungsten with some, paint on it, but it's actually gold, is very expensive. And this is part of the reason why it's centralized over time. With Bitcoin, if you run your own node, you can verify that what you're interacting with is Bitcoin, right? And it's not a paper claim, and it's not anything like that. So you're right in that a lot of, let's say, traditional investors or people in a certain demographic all over the world right now, they're looking for Bitcoin price exposure. And, there's products on the different exchanges here in Canada, we have them in the US, et cetera. ETFs seem to be coming down the pike that are going to open up a paper market for Bitcoin. Now, a lot of these institutions claim that they're buying Bitcoin for every dollar that comes into the fund, and there's a one-to-one backing and that kind of stuff, but you don't know. There's a huge element of trust there, and that's the problem. And so that's why Bitcoiners advocate for buying only the real thing, not paper exposure, not intermediated through a company that lists something on the stock market or whatever, and verifying for yourself that it is indeed Bitcoin. And if you do that, then you can be sure that, one, there's no intermediary between you and your asset. Nobody can cut off your access. Nobody can take it from you. Nothing. It is yours. And that it is what you think it is and what the market says it is. And so I think as an individual, you insulate yourself from shenanigans to some degree that way. But as a broader ethos of this community, if we can get more and more people to look at this thing as a tool of sovereignty rather than just another means of either preserving or growing capital, then that will foster a healthier ecosystem around this thing. It doesn't negate the fact that there will probably still be the ability for some form of manipulation in paper markets, and some people may fall prey to that. But I think because of the fact that this is a verifiable bearer asset without the need for an intermediary, it largely resists those types of shenanigans that have existed in the gold and other markets throughout history.
I know obviously everybody watching your show knows that because they're Bitcoiners and they already know that. But I would suggest to you that very, very few people who think they hold gold, most people who hold gold, unless they're a bug like me, they probably think that there is gold at the bank. That Bank of Australia, well, they'll have the gold, won't they? No, they don't have the gold. Bank of America, no, they don't have the gold. They've given you a promissory note.
Right.
I shouldn't think more than one person in 100 who has that exposure knows that. And if we get the mass market in Bitcoin, which we both think is a good thing and both want to happen, with millions of people coming into it, I think BlackRock will intercept them. That the danger of that is significantly higher than we might imagine just at the moment, which is why I would like to see some very senior respected people, which is difficult in the modern world we live in. If you're a multi-billionaire, you didn't get there because you're a saint. You probably got there because you're a teeny bit crooked. If you got to the top of the greasy pole in politics, you were probably almost certainly crooked. I would like to see somebody come in, a major profile, or in each country, because everyone's got a different profile, haven't they? We've got Tim Martin of Wetherspoons here, who's got a big pub chain, for example, who's quite a free-thinking guy. And if he comes in and say, for example, and this is not a flight of fancy, say, I will take Bitcoin in my pub. In my pubs, my whole chain, you could pay with Bitcoin, set up an account or something like that. And that would get a whole mass market thinking this is good. And he would then say, because he's that kind of guy, he could say, just a minute, just make sure of one thing, folks, you've got your own wallet, you've got your own system. And people say, oh, I'll make sure that that's okay. And I think if we had somebody in every major country who is of that social standing, or intellectual standing, or business standing, which actually automatically rules out politicians, certainly, and bankers. But I think that would move it further. I'm extremely keen. I like to play a bit of devil's advocate, like as indeed you do yourself. Otherwise, the show would be too boring. But I'm a big believer in it. I'm buying it. I'm going to buy more of it. I continue to buy more of it. To restore my position, to get out of this overweight gold position. So the more new money I get, I should be a bit kind of, and nothing I want to see succeed more, because it's on a political and moral level that I want to see Bitcoin. So I'm very much in the same moral dynamic as the average Bitcoiner. I'm just old and slightly, perhaps a little bit more cynical.
Well, fair enough. With age comes wisdom, and many of us haven't seen, the types of events or been so intimately, involved in them as you have. So fair enough. The last point I'll say on that topic, and then I'll let you go, is, it's I think more and more big names, quote unquote, are coming in now, and they're advocating for Bitcoin and why it's important and what its uses are. And I agree, like, it's often said in the space, you come for the gains, you stay for the freedom. You come because, wow, this thing is going up in price, I could become rich. And then you start to understand the philosophy and the ethos behind it. And you say, oh, this is about way more than getting rich. This is about getting free. This is about sovereignty. This is about morality. This is about all these things that we've been talking about. And so I think people will come for that. I think people all over the world will wake up to the economic necessity of having a life raft. And I think Bitcoin will be available to them. For example, if you're, a poor farmer in the Philippines and your government is, printing your currency like crazy, what's the easiest thing to do? It's probably to get on your smartphone and get some Bitcoin. And that's probably the easiest way to protect your wealth. And I think that'll happen more and more as the macro backdrop unravels. And I think that one of the critical catchphrases in this space, and which would serve to inhibit the potential issue that you've just been articulating, is something called, we say, not your keys, not your coins. And basically that just means if anybody is intermediating your relationship with the private keys to your Bitcoin, then they're not your Bitcoin. And so, but if you are the only intermediary there, if it's a solely a bare asset under your control, then a lot of the shenanigans that we've seen emerge in other markets would at least be resisted more than they have been in those markets. Not saying it's not possible for them to have an influence, but I think less of an influence. But as you said, people in your demographic, I mean, you may need someone to help you with this stuff, or you may need someone to help facilitate that. And that is a drawback that does inhibit, your degree of control or security over this asset, but maybe it's necessary in order for you to establish any exposure to it at all. So everyone's in different circumstances, and everyone has to. So I usually just recommend never stop learning about this, because the rabbit hole is extremely deep, and it's in the philosophical, the economic, the technological, the spiritual domain even. I mean, it's really, really deep. And I suggest that the best thing to do when the interest is peaked is just to keep learning. And there are so many great writers and speakers and all that kind of stuff in this space that produce so much great content for free that really, you're spoiled for choice if learning is what you want to do. Godfrey, you've been really, really gracious with your time, and I really do appreciate that. The last thing I wanted to ask you is just, here we are, right? We're in this crazy, dumpster fire of a world right now. How do you, what is your way, other than what we've been discussing, managing your personal finances, Bitcoin, gold, whatever? How are you integrating this in terms of what is your way of moving forward in the world as a result of finding yourself in such a a crazy place. Because I think a lot of people in the world right now, and this is partially the reason why so many people are so passionately going into Bitcoin, because it's kind of like the only accessible bastion of freedom and hope. And that's why it's drawing in so many people. But in day-to-day life, et cetera, like, what are your ambitions for trying to, and how do you integrate what's going on to move forward positively in the world, and, you know, not be driven mad by all of this craziness?
Well, that's a good question. Fun enough, we've been in this situation since March, of course. It's also my hypothesis that this will never end. I don't think we're going to come out of some form of lockdown. I think this is permanent, or semi-permanent, because if they're talking about further lockdown because the virus has mutated, the supposed virus has supposedly mutated, and they're pretending they're surprised the virus has mutated. Oh, come on. Every schoolboy who's doing science knows that viruses mutate. So that's more bullshit. So we're going to be in the lockdown situation in some form, certainly probably in some form for the rest of my life. But what is actually what we're doing, how am I handling it? I live in a small village in East Yorkshire. We have a small holding, a few chickens, a few horses, and that kind of thing. We have, my wife is still working, I'm still working, and there's youngsters in the village who are still working, and we've really formed a little, going back to the Anglo-Saxon times, we've gone back to the Anglo-Saxon village in many ways. We've got potential snitches in the village, of course, who can't wait to phone the authorities to tell us that we're having a drink somewhere, or we're walking the dog together or something like that, which is a very sad thing. But we found out in the village who are believers in freedom, personal freedom, physical freedom. That's brought us together, and it's a very eclectic mix, I can tell you, a very eclectic mix indeed. It's been, that aspect has been rather fun because they've taken away our pubs. And of course, you'll know that the British pub is at the heart of the nation, and has been since the days of Dr. Johnson, who preferred the tavern to the coffee house. That's where we meet and get together and exchange ideas. And you leave your rank in the car park. You leave your rank in the car park of a British pub. They've been trying to close pubs for decades. No, it's not just this. Politicians and government hate ordinary people getting together and exchanging ideas. They hate that. They can't deal with that. Freedom of association is something that all governments positively hate, and so consequently we're getting around that. We're getting around that by doing our own thing, as it were. And I'm not the only one. It's happening all over the country. People are running their little villages and their little lives in a slightly different way. They would have met at the pub. Speakeasy comes to mind. You know, speakeasy comes to mind, to be honest. I hope nobody's watching this in England. But yeah, so we're being very positive, and my wife and I, you know, we keep each other revved up, so we don't do negative thinking. And every time we think a bit negatively, which was last night, a bit negative, we got absolutely drunk as lords last night. I'm talking to you with a monster hangover here today. So the quickest way out of this is a bottle of whiskey.
Well said. Well said. Is leaving the UK even an option at this stage in your lives, or are you bunkered down?
Wouldn't know where to go.
Right.
I wouldn't know where to go. I mean, the reason I'm in this country is because I like pubs, I like roast beef, and I like Yorkshire pudding. And miserable bastards though they are in Yorkshire, I like Yorkshiremen.
Well,
so no, not at my time of life. But where would I go? Australia, Melbourne.
Well,
get beaten up by the bloody Australian police.
That's the question. You know, that's the $64 million question: is where the hell is there freedom in the world right now? You know, I mean, where would you go?
We look to the old dominions as being, you know, the land of the free, lumberjacks with check shirts in your part of the world, and guys with corks on their hats down in Australia. That's our perception here. And we can't believe when we see the Melbourne police in Australia arresting a girl for sunbathing, unless it was just a way of getting a telephone number, maybe. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But it's horrific and it's horrible and it's frightening. And that's what depresses us. Not our personal freedom, because we can live with that kind of problem. But when we look at the world the way it's going today, if that doesn't depress you and frighten you, there's something wrong with you.
I couldn't agree with that more. And, here's hoping that conversations like this, the work that you've been doing in writing and speech and videos, and all the other people who value freedom and who promote tools that help you establish more of it in your life, reach more and more ears. Maybe people have more time to consume this sort of stuff when they're locked down, and that's a silver lining in all this. So yeah, Godfrey, this has been a great discussion. It's been great to connect with you. I appreciate the time. Any last words before we sign off here?
No, just thank you for inviting me, and thanks to all those Bitcoiners who've given me input in the last, via Twitter and stuff. It's been, I do assess it, and it's been most useful, and the learning curve's been steep, and I'm still learning, but then I think we're all still learning, really, aren't we, every day?
Absolutely. And as you know, for people that are honest and forthright and interested, they're a very helpful bunch. So I'm sure, if you ever have any further questions, they and I would be happy to help you out in any way.
Super duper.
All right, mate. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.